Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here. Justin Smith. Left my corporate job at Bloomberg, where I was CEO of Bloomberg Media for 10 years, to actually start a news company called Semafor, which is dedicated to trying to solve this problem that we're discussing today. And our guest is Faisal Abbas, who's really one of the leading rising lights in Middle Eastern journalism. He's the editor-in-chief of Arab News, the leading Middle Eastern English language daily. And we're here to talk about one of the most pernicious and difficult and hard to solve problems. And so we want to welcome any audience ideas throughout this. Please come in as well. But this is the question of our news ecosystem around the world, in America and globally. And just to start with some very big headline numbers, there's so many different studies. We were introduced with the Reuters study. There's a study every couple of months. But fundamentally, if you look at all the studies in America and around the world, trust in news, serious trust in news, has plummeted from 80 to 85% trust levels in the 1990s, 1980s, so 25, 30 years ago, to the low teens. And in some instances, for instance, there's a recent study that said 8% of Americans actually deeply trust their news. And around the world, it's not a much better picture. It's actually slightly above that. So it's a very, very big problem, but a number of us are working on it. But I want to start first by asking Faisal about the trust in news question from the Middle Eastern perspective, from the non-American perspective. Is it viewed as the epidemic that it is here?
Thank you for the question, Justin. It's a pleasure talking to somebody of your caliber and experience, and thank you to FII for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss this very important topic. Look, the figures you mentioned do not surprise me. We're living in an era where we are literally bombarded by information left, right, and center. So for people to distrust information that they are receiving, that is not unusual. However, in every crisis, in every problem, there's also an opportunity. The flip side of that equation is we are noticing a significant increase in subscription, i.e. people for the first time since the kind of expansion of the internet willing to actually pay money for a premium for professional quality journalism. In fact, by the end of 2022, we've seen a 58% increase in subscriptions to news platforms, according to web analytics company Piano, surveying 123 top news providers in the world.
But do we think the rise in subscriptions means a potential decline in trust, or are subscriptions being fueled by content that is ideologically or geographically targeting a very avid base?
Well, to give you a short answer, I think it's all of the above. We are living in a climate where, humanity has never had this opportunity whereby so many people, almost everybody technically on the planet, has the ability to disseminate and receive information unfiltered instantly. So this is, a great power, but comes absolutely with a great responsibility, which many of us, unfortunately, are not taking very well. The result is people are no longer sure, and we've seen this during the pandemic. In the year that followed 2020, Facebook has removed 20 million posts that are inaccurate or they considered in violation of their terms. And these are things that affect people's lives and health, and conspiracy theories about the pandemic. So it's all of the above, plus the technological factor that I mentioned earlier.
So just to provide you a framework, or maybe to provide the audience a framework, what is the original source of distrusted news, or what are some of the original problems? And I think you can divide it into three segments. You have, of course, the traditional private sector controlled news that sometimes are incentivized to actually create news for certain audiences that therefore inject opinion or perspective for those audiences. Example, MSNBC or Fox News. There's a business model advantage for actually pushing different ideological views. Then you have government media, which is, I think you'd have some thoughts on as well, because that's very common in the Middle East. And there obviously is a situation where the government is seen as a key actor in the shaping of the news, and therefore is affecting what consumers view. And finally, maybe the most pernicious, of course, which only began 15, 17 years ago, is the social media companies and the algorithms that arrived to manipulate the distribution and surfacing of news in ways that has not been necessarily so responsible. So how do we fix private, public sector, social media? The government, the regulators around the world are fixing social media. Talk to us about working in a part of the world where the government is very tied to media, and how the trust issue can therefore be attacked in that context.
Well, no, I fully understand. And look, we need to call a spade a spade. You don't have a First Amendment anywhere in the Middle East. We're simply not there yet. However, particularly in Saudi Arabia, we're living in a positive climate of reforms. And the whole vision is actually focused on setting targets, KPIs, and transparency for government officials and bodies. So it is unthinkable that we will not get there in the end. So I'm very positive about the future. However, also to call a spade, we're not there yet. So what we do have now are individual initiatives or attempts, which in all honesty, I think we should be applauded for, not criticized for, because we are trying our best within the current climate, and the numbers speak for themselves. We've seen, at least from an Arab news perspective, we've seen around 500% growth in traffic and audience. We have subscriptions to our newsletter going through the roof. We are on the BBC Morning Press Review every morning. So we must be doing something right. Saudi media continues to dominate the Arab media scene, not from a resource perspective, from a quality journalism perspective. So be it Al Arabiya, be it Al Sharq Al Awsat, be it Arab news. So the trajectory or the kind of vision for the future is positive, but certainly from a regulation point of view, we are simply not there yet.
But in your newsroom and with your management, I mean, is this question of trust something you discuss with your peers, with your journalists? Are you trying to initiate certain initiatives and so on to try to restore trust, at least in incremental ways?
Every single day, every single morning, every single evening, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Justin, editorial integrity cannot be promised or pledged. It has to be proven every hour with every story. Reputation arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. So it only takes one mistake, hence the gray hair at such a young age. But it's not a responsibility we take lightly. Neither does our management or any serious news organization in the world.
Yeah. Well, just to sort of, my company, Semafor, we believe that one of the best ways of attacking trust is to actually rethink the article format, to take the traditional article. Increasingly, journalists are very, very clever at being able to combine news with analysis and ultimately with perspective and opinion. And so what we've done at our company is actually to create a new format where we make all the journalism transparent. We say, this is the news, this is the journalist's perspective, this is an alternative perspective, this is the opinion, so that the reader has right for them on a platter a completely clear set of concepts about how we're treating the news. Could something like that work in the Middle East?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're already there in terms of separating opinion from news. However, I think it's much more important in the American context with what we're seeing now, where news and views are becoming a bit of a gray area. And if I have a moment to elaborate back, I think this all started under President Reagan, who some refer to as the father of fake news, by abolishing something called the Fairness Doctrine, which has been enshrined by the FCC since 1949. And even when the Democratic-led Congress in 1987 tried to reverse that, he vetoed it. And that essentially paved the way for what the Fairness Doctrine, for those who don't know what it is, it's a mandate for every public broadcaster to give equal time and opportunity for both sides of an argument. So when you dissolve something like that, this paves the way for the creation of Fox News and allows MSNBC or CNN to go in the completely opposite direction. And the result is the media is no longer able to act as a fourth estate, and what you have is more of the same. So people who watch Fox News have a completely different understanding of the reality than people who watch CNN or MSNBC. Add to that the impact of social media, which literally creates a bubble around you, so that just like Plato's allegory of the cave, you start even cursing people that tell you there's a different reality outside, or hating people that tells you there's a different reality outside. So it's rather alarming, and I think we need to really find a solution for that issue.
Yeah, and there are some really interesting signs of responding to this from the private sector. For instance, I mean, CNN is a very interesting example. When the transaction to Warner Brothers Discovery happened, the controlling shareholders of Warner Brothers and CNN said, we would like to actually shift the presentation of news in CNN so that it actually is much, much more explicitly bipartisan. The journalists went to the Hill and got a lot more Republicans. And that was actually an economic decision. So the private sector is moving. How about social media in the Middle East? Is it in the US, social media is on the decline? It's no longer as much of a player in the news dissemination space as it was. And it's also being regulated around the world, in Australia and Europe, possibly here in the US. Tell us about the ascendancy or the waxing and waning of social media and its effect on news in the Middle East.
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important topic. If we were to use an analogy, I would say social media, if it was a human being, it would be a human being that just reached puberty. So whatever they did before that was cute, or they can't be that harmful, or they're too young to know what they're doing. And don't forget, these organizations have been built by engineers, not by journalists or people who are in media who understood the impact of what they are doing. What we've seen now is more accountability. So I participated in a media conference in 2012, and we had somebody from Facebook on the panel who said, look, we are just a platform. We are a tool. People can use us for good or bad. That's their problem, and they'll be held responsible. What we're seeing now through regulation is social media platforms being treated as publishers, as in you're liable for the content that, and as you should be, because we've lobbied and argued for a very long time that it's actually our kids that are being targeted by extremist groups and being groomed to migrating and joining these groups in certain countries. And you cannot allow a terrorist group to be on that platform and then say we're just a platform. So that debate has evolved. And in the Middle East, it's no different. I think the other part of the equation that really needs to be solved, to your point about the private sector, is the commercialization. In a way, we're a victim, we're all, actually, this is a global problem. We're a victim of a situation whereby you are penalized to do professional journalism and rewarded if you do the lazy fake news route. And if I have a moment, I'll say, you are a former CEO of Bloomberg, so you know very well how much it costs to commission a story, to pay for the writer, to pay for the legal review, to pay for the copy editing and the fact-checking, and buy the rights for the copyrights for the image or the videos. That's all costs that the publisher entails, and then you end up splitting in a not fair way with the social media platforms or Google the revenues, versus somebody who pays $30 to buy a domain, for example, the Denver Guardian, and publishes a story in 2016 about the CIA agent who leaked the Hillary Clinton emails, being found dead, and it becomes, in that month, in 2016, the most shared story on Facebook, more than the New York Times, more than the Wall Street Journal, more than the Washington Post. And of course, we're here in America, and people know two things. First of all, the story was not true. And second of all, there's nothing called the Denver Guardian. And that is just a classic model of how easy it is and how actually social media will reward you if you're without any penalty if you are publishing fake news. But
do you think commercial pressures are actually a solution here? I mean, there's been, one of the best, most recent examples, of course, is Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, where one of the first things he did was get rid of the entire content moderation department, which are the people that stand by to look to make sure that the content is actually accurate or not accurate. And he lost half of his advertisers Do you see that as a sort of a potential lever, either here or around the world?
I think the verdict is still out, and I think Eric Schmidt described the internet as the biggest human experiment in anarchy that has ever happened. Yeah. You know, I would be doing you and this intelligent audience a disservice if I say there's me or anybody who really understands how this is going to go forward. But essentially, I go back to the point that these tech companies were not founded by journalists or publishers. They were founded by engineers who didn't quite understand the impact that they have on you know, what social impact the ability to disseminate fake news has. So I think it's up to us. And if I were to conclude and say, I would say only journalism can save journalism.
Yes. Well, let's talk a bit about sort of generational questions, because there's a... Yeah. Okay, finish.
Out of time.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much, Faisal, Abbas.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.